Hello to both of you. My name is Allison. I'm going to be interviewing Lauren here with us on writing ASL Access. Thank you so much to both of you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I apologize. I think my connection is a little bit slow, so hopefully it won't be too much of an issue. So if I may lag for a moment on a question, but thanks for having me.
No problem. I have a question for you. So there's yard work happening next to my house. Can you hear it in the background, or does everything sound okay?
I hear a little static, but I think that may be on my end. Is everyone who's joining in, are you all hearing okay? Hopefully, because this is what we're dealing with. So we'll try to talk clearly. And we have Alina, signing for us.
Well, let's just get right into the interview, if that's good for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I usually start by just asking survivors to tell us as much or as little of their experience as they're comfortable with.
It's so funny. Each time I survivors, are asked to tell our story, it's like there's so much. Where do I begin? Where do I start? Where do I finish? I will share that I had previously, before doing this work, I'm now a credentialed victim advocate and trauma support specialist. I worked in the TV and film industry for decades, working below the line crew, making all the TV shows, movies, commercials happen. I had been working on a TV show for CBS, $1 as a director's assistant. I had been working 90-hour weeks, working in a toxic environment, which many changes need to be made within all industries, but especially the entertainment industry. And over Memorial Day weekend, after filming, 90-hour weeks, I was assaulted by one of the lead actors on the show. As naive as I was at the time, I inherently knew that it was not safe for me to come forward while we were filming, while I was continuously working with these people, while he was seen as an investment in the show. Ultimately, a few years after the assault, I ended up reporting to the police and filed a lawsuit against CBS. All of this is public record. I won't, get into any more specifics, but I talk about it a lot. People can find that if they're looking for it.
Very nice.
Thank you. I think that a lot happens in the TV and film industry, especially with below the line crew. There's so many different power dynamics at play that make it all but impossible to speak out, especially if you want to continue to work.
So can you talk a little bit about the responses that you received? The reporting or the lawsuit or friends and family? We could take it several steps at a time.
Yeah, the response that I received was far from supportive. I would say it was more than unsupportive. It was harmful. I did, while I was still working on the show, there were several times I tried to come forward about other harassment, bullying on the show. I was literally told to sweep it under the rug, not to ruffle any feathers. So in a way, I recognize now that it was a litmus test. Like, if it's not safe for me to come forward about these other things, it's not going to be safe for me to come forward about, the entirety of what happened. Oftentimes, I think in so many different systems, organizations, schools, places of work, and this was the case for myself, that if you name the problem was that I was harmed, I was assaulted, I became the problem. The person who is harmed becomes the problem. And oftentimes the way it's dealt with is just getting rid of the problem. And that's why so often survivors are ostracized. They lose their jobs, they lose their communities. And that's Unfortunately, what happened to me, I lost my thriving, 2-decade career in film and, TV and film industry, lost my network of friends that I had built for years. Um, I was seen as the problem, and everyone wanted to distance themselves from me when I needed support the most. Um, and again, I think that's sadly true for a lot of survivors.
What about other close friends not associated with the industry in your family? Were their responses similar or different?
It took me a while to have some support. There were some people who were well meaning and have supported me the entire time. I think that, well, let me rewind for a second. Their support has been life changing. I also think that it is incredibly challenging to know how to support survivors in your life if you haven't been around it and are not trained to. And I think that sometimes a lot of well-meaning support is actually can be harmful. But I feel really lucky for a few friends who have been patient with me. I've been patient as them as I've kind of taught them what it looked like to support me, support survivors, and having more empathy for them as they're trying to grapple with this as well. Because abuse, sexual violence, it impacts the entire community, regardless if the community acknowledges it or not.
Absolutely. And I think that really aligns with the reason that Start by Believing is not just for criminal professionals. It is equally as important for friends and family members, our community, so that when survivors reach out to the people closest, they know how to respond. We know that that's who they share with first.
Yeah, and I mean, life experience studies show that, how people closest to the victim respond, how validating, how, believing, supportive they are, goes on to impact whether the survivor is going to have PTSD, chronic trauma, and the severity of it. And that's why I love Start by Believing, because if we can start there and continue to build upon it, we can just create, softer landings for survivors when they do speak out, when they do disclose.
Absolutely. And just one other thing to throw out there, you know that survivors receive more negative reactions from their friends and family members than they do from law enforcement. And so we need to make sure they are prepared to respond appropriately.
That's devastating.
So I think we've kind of covered this, but I want to ask it in a slightly different way and see if you have any more that you want to talk about meant to be believed by those few family members or those few that were in your network, but also contrast that with what it meant to not be believed. So
Yeah, I think that it's really challenging because often society encourages survivors to come forward, speak out, and then there isn't that infrastructure of support and care for survivors. In my experience, sadly, I think more people support survivors in theory than in reality. And so when I did start finally being believed and supported, it was life changing. I think that it was very, very validating. I think that there's a lot of grief to that, especially when you have been denied resources, support, care, especially from those close to you. I find that myself and also many other survivors, it's, we want to be believed, but believed by the people that matter to us most. Again, Start by Believing is a great way to, connect with anybody who's disclosing. And I think that when I was believed, validated, had space to share my authentic experiences, that I didn't have to be the perfect victim in order to receive support or care. That, that is some of the biggest moments of healing that I've had. And I think that all of us here could agree that all survivors deserve access to a survivor informed care and resources. And oftentimes, not having that support, that belief, the validation makes the difference between being able to move forward with your life and not. And everyone deserves to be believed, everyone deserves to have resources. It's life changing.
Absolutely. So, can you talk a little bit about what healing looked like for you?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
What healing looked like for you?
Oh, that is something that I think about like probably more than I should. But based on my own healing journey and the work that I do, I think that healing is such a big word, and it's often expressed like, oh, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm healed. No, and I think that sets up so much unfair expectations for ourselves and our communities, that it really is about the little moments. So I've as I mentioned, I think a lot about this, and I a while ago I saw a picture of myself. After the assault, I had cut all my hair off, I dyed it, I really wanted to just kind of hide in myself. And I was looking at old pictures, and by then my hair had grown out. And I was thinking about how I didn't notice day after day my hair was growing, that it was growing a little bit each day. But suddenly, 6 months later, I'm looking at that photo and my hair has inches and inches growth to it. Then I think that's a lot of like healing from trauma, healing after abuse, is that there's so many little moments and that we should celebrate those moments, and they're happening every day in our life, and that we notice them in bigger moments. But be patient with yourself. And I think that reminding myself that has been really helpful for healing for me. I would also say that I spent a lot of time chasing justice. And for a while, I confused what justice and healing looked like, because I think they can get really, really messy. Um, and it's so hard when a lot of these different systems that are set up for justice are really abrasive, kind of archaic systems, and that does not necessarily equate to healing. And I think that choosing trying to seek accountability, justice probably has prolonged my healing, because I've been harmed throughout that as well. And that I think that for me, healing, like the biggest components or catalysts in my healing journey were learning about trauma and learning, okay, that makes sense that my body responded like that. I'm not crazy. And also finding community. In my work, I talk a lot about community as justice. What is healing to me? For me, what is healing to you? For me, I had my community taken from me. I lost all of that. So finding that again, that was healing. Maybe it's art as, healing, art is justice. Maybe it's hiking. Everybody's going to be a little different. For me, it was trauma education, time, and community.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I like how you use the example of your hair growing out, how it's a little growth over time. Um, as you look back at kind of that phase of some of those little moments, if you're comfortable, do you have kind of an example looking backwards at maybe one of those little moments?
Yeah. So this will be vulnerable. So thank you all for holding space. As I previously mentioned, after the assault, I had cut all my hair off. I dyed it. I used to have really long, bright red, think Pippi Longstocking hair. And after the assault, I wore baggy clothes. I dyed my hair blonde. Like I chopped it all off. Like, I mean, it was short. I did everything I could to try to disappear, not be noticed. I used to love to get my nails done, paint them in different, cute things. After that, I stopped. It's not that I necessarily thought that that is why I was harmed, but I felt safer to just not call attention to myself. And now look at me wearing nail polish. It's actually just been in the past year that it felt comfortable for me to do that. And it all started because um, I'm learning ASL, American Sign Language, and I would go to class or watch all these really great deaf influencers, teachers, and they had these great nails, and that made me, okay, maybe I should try to paint them, and building confidence in class, with that community that I had built. And, now I'm like, ooh, look at me, nail polish. That may seem really small and insignificant, but for me, like that's huge. And I think that's what, I don't know, I think it symbolizes I'm allowing myself to be seen again, and that's a big thing.
I really love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So I know a lot of people are joining in because they follow you on Instagram or other platforms of social media. Talk about the work you do. Talk about how you start your accounts.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking, and all thank you for being here and hanging out with us on this Tuesday afternoon. I started MTMV Community Support Network, which is a community for survivors and supporters of survivors. I can't believe it, but we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary in March. So, woohoo!
Excuse me, was that your 3rd anniversary?
5.
5th, thank you.
5th anniversary. And it really, I never anticipated it growing to how it did. When I first started it, I felt really alone and confused in my own pocket of the world. One thing about me is I'm really stubborn, and as much as I didn't want it to be true, but I was also convinced that maybe there were other people like me feeling similarly. And at the same time, I had started taking classes about understanding trauma in the body, trauma responses, understanding, rape myths, survivor-informed care. And that, as I mentioned earlier, was just such a big catalyst for me. So many different light bulbs went off. And again, I was like, well, maybe other people are going to find this interesting. And I said this before, I'll probably say it again, but it's really sobering how right I was. I mean, I run a community that talks about trauma and abuse, sexual violence, and the fact that it does have such a large community, people engaged, it really just emphasized, I think, the need for these communities and these spaces. But yeah, so I am a credentialed victim advocate. Shout out to NOVA NACP. I am also a trauma support specialist. In addition to running the Instagram and other social media accounts, and creating and sharing educational content relating to the survivor experience. I also lead one-on-one individual support, group support, workshops, trainings for local and global communities alike. I do consulting with various law firms, research teams, organizations about strengthening survivor-informed care. I may sound cheesy, but I consider myself a community builder. That's kind of my favorite thing to do. Creating spaces for authentic storytelling, survivor storytelling, creating space for survivors to find mutuality with each other. I really believe that like I lead the community, but it's everybody's community and everybody does such a great job making space for each other. I'll, post something and then I'll go lead a workshop and I come back and other people are like supporting people in the comments. And I think that, inform communities, inform individuals, and we can all bring that back to our own communities. And it's just really important to me to try to create the resources and support that I needed that wasn't there. There's a lot of other great work being done, and I've met so many amazing people, including you and Violence Against Women International. I've done some great trainings with you all. Now I'm just rambling, so somebody stop me.
So this is full-time work for you now, right?
It is. I feel very lucky.
And when did you make that transition, like that moment where you knew that, you really truly built something that was growing and it was time to, transition from whatever was supporting you to this work? What was that transition like, or when did you know?
I mean, I think that I always wanted to once I start doing this work. I never expected to have such a large community. It always sounds weird to say followers because that doesn't apply to every, situation. But the pandemic, I was already doing virtual work and I really liked the idea of, creating spaces and communities and support outside of our usual systems that so often do not show up for survivors. And virtual, it allows folks to be able to, search for hashtags, terms in the comfort of their own home that maybe is a little more comfortable than going to a building that they've never been to before, speaking to someone they don't know face to face, creating these spaces. And then the pandemic happened, and that definitely solidified, not everybody is even going to be able to access care. They're not going to have it in their location, or for whatever reason, they're not going to be able to get to it. And that was very much like, I think the, community sized almost doubled during the pandemic because again, people were searching for community support. COVID has still impacted so many survivor cases, access to support, access to rape kits. So more and more people were looking for that. And I think that's always going to be the case. Social media has become such a big fabric of our lives, using that as a way to connect with people. Sure, there's its harms and such, but yeah, I feel like it's been the past few years though.
So you're steeped in the work daily, which is part of healing because it's a continuous process. But knowing that there's the opposite side of that, that can be triggering, that can be hard. What do you do to, take care of yourself and support yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question and something that I'm always working to improve because it really is critical in this type of work. Setting boundaries are really important. I am also fortunate in the sense that I work for myself, so I'm able to set my schedule. I'm not the biggest morning person, so I don't schedule things for first thing in the morning to give me time to start my day. If I'm having a stressful week, I may adjust, kind of set my schedule things based upon that. I chat with survivors, pretty much all day long, through social media. There are times when I feel tired and I'm like, I don't think I'm going to be the best support. So, I'll throw something up, stepping offline for a week, a couple of days, whatever it may be to recharge. If I'm going things in my personal life that I know are ahead, it may be kind of a lighter schedule, letting people know that I may be a little slower to respond to messages. So trying to honor myself and also communicate that. So people are like, why isn't she answering?
That's a good plan. I think one of the things that you see with social media, um, I'm not going to call you an influencer because I don't believe that's the right term. You're a community builder, but with influencers, that feeling, that need to always be on, to always be available, to always respond. I would assume you feel that same compulsion to some extent. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I do. And I think that also in addition to, just direct support that, when there's a big story or headline or high profile case, there's also more of an expectation for advocates, accounts similar to mine to be posting about it, which can create some pressure. I think that I'm getting better and better at, I'm not going to be able to discuss or share on everything that I would want to. And that's okay. There's so many different, niche, however you say that, in this line of work that we all shouldn't be doing it all, and that it's important for me to focus on what, MTMV's missions and goals are, and that I simply won't be able to do it all. As one of the, I guess, silver linings, I don't know, something that I've noticed from this work is constantly telling people to be kind to themselves, to set, work on boundaries, creating space for their needs. It's made me a lot more supportive and compassionate to myself, because it's hard to be saying that all day long and then, go home and then just be really mean to myself and have so like unrealistic expectations. So it's been a good balance of, oh, you wouldn't say that to another survivor. You wouldn't expect that. Like, why would you expect that from yourself?
Absolutely. That's a great reminder. We have just a couple minutes left, and I have one last thing I want to touch on if you're comfortable going there. But can you talk a little bit about the dark side of being on social media? Um, the unintended consequences, if you will, of having a social presence, and some the negative responses that you get, or feeling of someone has reached out for help and you can't help them and they're disappointed. Some of those other sides. How do you respond to those? How do you cope with those parts?
Yeah, that's always really challenging. And I think continuously a work in progress, especially not being able to, support everybody when or how they want to. Doing my best to communicate any potential limitations slash, do I know somebody who can? Because again, I don't do it all. So what would be a more appropriate resource or for that person if I can? I think that there are a lot of survivor advocates out there. And one thing that I have noticed doing the work that I do, I think that, well, I know everybody knows that I'm a survivor and that they haven't forgotten, that they forget that sometimes that it is a survivor behind the advocacy page. And I think that sometimes Lauren as a survivor gets a little lost, and that it's, advocate Lauren, and advocate Lauren always has to be on. And I find it really important to try to make space for those different parts of myself. And I do think that my experiences help inform my work, and, vice versa. But making sure to, try to balance that. And if I'm feeling unheard, it's like, okay, survivor Lauren maybe needs to nourish that side, not just advocate Lauren.
Yeah, that awareness is pretty important.
This has been great.
Yes, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I want to be respectful from your time, so I'm not going to keep you over that. I know that you have important and valuable work coming throughout the rest of the day. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your story, for talking about your work, and just in general for the work that you do.
Well, thank you. Right back at you. I'm honored to be here. The work that and Violence Against Women International is doing is so, so important. Any folks who are listening, if you're looking for any good training workshops, I've taken a couple of good ones with them. I'm sure their current schedule can be found on their website. I did a great trauma-informed interviewing training that just it really was kind of life-changing for my work, and I think it's great that you are continuing to strengthen and improve this infrastructure for survivors. I like to try to end groups and lives with a quick little thing because I know that sometimes talking about this we can stir things up. Do you mind if I just lead us in a
Go for it.
little exercise? If it feels comfortable, let's take a moment, stretch, unclench your jaw, lower your shoulders, and shake it out. Woo! The sound effects help. Woo! It does help. That's also one of my go-to things. You should see me in between groups and stuff. I'm just like in my office. My dog's looking at me like, what is going on? Also, thank you, Alina, for providing ASL access for us today.
Yes, thank you, Elena. Thank you, Lauren, for joining us. I hope you both have a great rest of your day. To everybody that tuned in, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.